All right, good morning, everybody. Please take your seats. Bob, you're going to give the lecture if you don't sit down. Good. Everybody have a good rest? Yes? You guys can hear me? All right, excellent. The fun begins today. Walking through the music building, hearing all the incredible quartets, rehearsing, practicing, trying to be as good as they can be, and man, do they sound good. So I think we're in for a fantastic week of music making. Last competition, a number of you asked me about how the quartets prepare. How do you study chamber music? And I thought, well, that'll be fun. We'll just put a little panel together and we can talk about how people study chamber music. So I asked some incredible colleagues, and I'll introduce them in a second, about that. And I teach chamber music, and they all teach chamber music. We all study chamber music, and then I thought, what's so special about chamber music that it's different than studying anything else? And I've been thinking about that a lot. So we'll get into it, and we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. But we are so incredibly lucky to have a real plethora of incredible, dedicated people on campus whose lives are about performing and teaching and encouraging and coaching young chamber musicians. So let me first introduce who is with us on the panel. Somebody that is working incredibly hard this week in our special program of young chamber musicians, Renelle Sheffley, who studied at the Glenn Gould School. I remember her playing chamber music. I remember how into it she was, and now she lives in Banff, and she teaches an incredible number of students. She's a Juno Award-winning performer herself, and she runs the program that brings the young musicians to Banff, not the competing quartets, but the younger musicians that you heard yesterday. So welcome, please, Renelle. And first time coming to Banff, although he's heard about it for a long time, is my dear friend Eckhart Runge, who was for many years the cellist of the Artemis Quartet. And in addition to being an extraordinary performer, both in and outside of the quartet, he's also a member of the faculty of the Robert Schumann Hochschule in Düsseldorf, where his focus is on chamber music. Welcome, Eckhart. It is Düsseldorf. It is Düsseldorf, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I got that right. And finally, I think you if you've been here before, you know our dear friend Mark Steinberg, who is first violin of the great Brentano Quartet, has taught here, has taught at the incredible chamber music program in Taos, New Mexico. We'll talk a little bit about that, and is on the faculty of the Juilliard School, among others. Welcome, Mark Steinberg. So as a way of getting into, oh, sorry. It doesn't matter. But no, I'm Barry Shiffman. I get to be the director of this incredible program, and as well teach at the Glenn Gould School, and teach as well in the Taylor Academy, which is the young artist program of the Royal Conservatory, which is where one of the young groups that's with us comes from. Yeah, so I thought as a way of getting into this idea of chamber music study, it might be interesting to hear from our panelists how they first started playing chamber music as young people. So maybe we'll start with Renelle. When did you start playing chamber music?
I'm going to have to remember back a long time here, Barry. Well, I have 5 siblings who all play music. So I think the first time, my mom actually was just bringing this up, the first time I was playing chamber music, when you have more than one person, it counts, right? I was probably 6 years old playing open strings along with my older sister and cousins. So it started young, and then I started more formal training when I was about 12.
And what did that look like, the formal training?
So then that looked more like what we're seeing here, where you are all given a specific part to learn, and then you get together once a week and you rehearse, and then you have coachings once a week with different coaches at the conservatory. So.
Right. And Eckhart, you have a great story you shared earlier with me.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting story because I was in a school orchestra, as a high school orchestra, and usually these orchestra are not really complete with students of the school. So they were, the conductor filled up our orchestra with amateur players that were in the age of my parents or maybe older. I was 15 or 16, and after one rehearsal, 3 elderly gentlemen came up to me and told me they would like to talk to me, and they had a question I should consider. I don't need to answer right away. Their cellist just passed, and were asking me if I would like to join their amateur quartet. So at first, this question seemed a little bit strange to me. And luckily, they were very nice, and they didn't expect me to answer right away.
Did you ask how he died?
No. Maybe they tried to play the Wiedemann. I don't know. Anyway, first, it seemed out of question to join a group. I wanted to spend the free time I had hanging out with people of my age, and maybe also not necessarily playing music all the time. I mean, right. I also had other interests. But then I thought about it a little bit, and then because they were so nice, and they offered also to me to pick me up in their fancy cars, and they had nice apartments, and they said they would have a dinner after the rehearsal. And there was all sorts of good stuff. So then I decided to give it a try, and I said, okay, let's do it. And it was really nice. We met maybe every second week for an evening. They came pick me up, and they were lawyers and professors, and had really, I was living in Brussels at that time, so they had really nice Art Deco apartments. And we would side read some quartets in the first part of the rehearsal. In the second part, we would work on a specific piece. Yeah. And the thing was, they knew everything about string quartet. They had been playing on an amateur level their whole lives. Maybe they had some technical issues that I didn't have, but I didn't know anything. I had not played a single string quartet in my whole life. So I learned a lot from them, and I'm very grateful for this experience.
Oh, that's beautiful, thank you. And Mark, what about you?
For me, the first time I played string quartets, I was 10 years old, and I was enrolled in a school in New York called the School for Strings, which was founded by my former teacher, Louise Barrand, a Suzuki school. And part of the curriculum was playing string quartets, and I was plopped down in the middle of this quartet to play a Haydn minuet. I had never done anything like that. That day I learned how to read the viola clef. I learned how the repeats work in a minuet and trio movement, which I now know is not correct. But anyway, that's what they told me at the time. And I was floored by the experience. I just couldn't believe, after several years of playing on my own with my little scratchy sound, that somehow my little scratchy sound sounded just that bit better when it was combined with other little scratchy sounds. And it was sort of an amazing thing to me that someone could play something and I could play something back, and it felt like we were talking to each other, and I was completely hooked that very first day.
Yeah, beautiful.
I also I was very lucky several years later at a music festival as a high school student that someone had either the stupidity or the foresight to put me in a group playing second violin for a late Beethoven quartet with a group of college students. And I had at that point played quartets for many, many years, but always in the situation where I would play and the teacher would tell us what to do, and that was that. I had never had a rehearsal in my life. And suddenly I was sitting there, and these people had a score for the piece, and they were looking at the score and having ideas and thoughts about, and I could not understand how that was happening, that they were looking at this thing, and it had an impact on how they wanted to play and the decisions they were going to make. And that was a huge learning experience for me. That was really, really exciting in the end.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Myself, I grew up in Toronto. I have 5 siblings. We never played chamber music. But my first introduction to chamber music was at a summer camp. And immediately following that camp, I came to Banff Centre. I think I was 11, and started playing chamber music here with other young musicians. And I remember, similar to your description, Mark, just being utterly overwhelmed with how much fun this was. And I didn't really want to do much else. like solo practice became kind of drudgery. Like it was not nearly as much fun as hanging out with people, and the sounds that you heard, just blew me away. And then at the Royal Conservatory in Toronto, there was a wonderful program. Strangely now I direct that, what that program became, but chamber music was core activity, and I was in a piano trio, and we rehearsed a couple times a week, and on the weekends we would get coached, and we explored. I remember the first was Beethoven Trio Opus 1 No. 1, and it was probably way too hard for me particularly. The pianist was extraordinary to sort of do anything, but it was just, you couldn't wait for the weekend to go and to spend a couple hours rehearsing with these people. And now in the program when I directed, I always say that you can take violin or piano lessons and not be in the program, whether it be Juilliard Prep or the Taylor Academy in Toronto. You don't need those programs to go study violin, or just go pay somebody to take some lessons. You want to take some theory, you can do that. You want to go to concerts, you can. So really, what do those programs give you? They give you community. Mm-hmm. And the core activity of any community of musicians is really chamber music. So that's, I think, why we're seeing all those programs that have all these extraordinary trios and quartets and quintets coming out of it, because what else do we need those programs for? You can capture all the other information individually. You don't need to go to a weekend program at the Juilliard School, but for being with all the other people and doing things that you can't do alone. I think that's really extraordinary. This idea of what Eckhart shared, the love of the amateur and how they've attached onto this idea of making music with friends is so incredibly important. When I was with the St. Lawrence Quartet, we were for many years at Stanford University, and strangely at that time, Condoleezza Rice was provost, and she hired us for that position. And she's a very fine pianist, I would say, very good amateur pianist. And after we interviewed and were being offered, we had to go and meet with Dr. Rice, and we actually even played with her and spoke about it. And she spoke to us about this network of people in her life that were amateur music makers, and how much importance she placed on that. So we started a program at Stanford in the summers that brought both conservatory-focused young groups like these young quartets, or even some of the quartets competing, and at the same time we invited adult amateur music makers to come. And they were part of the same program. They weren't relegated to a separate curriculum. They were all mixed. And what was amazing for us to witness was that some of the conservatory focus groups would see the passionate love that the older adult amateurs had towards their craft, and were stunned. And in some cases, very, very uncomfortable, and had these kind of existential crisis in the middle of it, like, what am I doing? Why am I don't love it like they love it. I should be doing, they should, and so it was really interesting to see how the amateur experience influenced those younger players, exactly as Eckhart's describing. It's very inspiring to be around people that are doing something only for the reason that they want to be doing it, that they really genuinely love it. And that program continues. It's an incredibly successful thing. At that program, all of those musicians are getting coached, and I'm thinking, but what are we actually teaching them? So I thought maybe we could explore what it is to actually teach chamber music. Are there special things about chamber music that are so vastly different from studying any other music? Mark, maybe you want to take
I get to
pick up.
start with
Yeah,
this
you can
one.
start.
You want to go the other way? You know, of course, chamber music is music. All the elements of music that we use to make it vibrant and alive are present in chamber music. What's maybe a little bit special about chamber music is how we include each other in our music making, which means there are issues of how we move, which I think is very important. I mean, we do have in our midst as musicians these people who spend their whole lives thinking about how they move and how it relates to music. We call them conductors. And in a chamber music group, of course, we're all conducting each other all the time. So no one is really leading, no one is following, everyone is co-leading, co-conducting at all times. And there's a lot that goes into that in terms of the size of a gesture, the shape of a gesture, the texture of a gesture. That tells us so much to forecast how people are going to make a musical statement and how we can join them. There are issues of listening carefully and of being adaptable, of really honing the craft of picking out the exact kind of texture and motion within a sound so that you can match it or counter it. A lot of times people talk about chamber music as if the supreme value of chamber music is simultaneity and matching. I don't believe that that's true. I think that that's one beautiful thing we can do, but only one in a wide array of ways that parts can interact. And just as when you have a wonderful conversation or debate with other people, that's how we need to feel when we play chamber music together. So we need to be sensitive to the people around us. We need to be very adaptable. In a chamber music group, there are social issues. You have to be able to embody someone else's idea fully and bring it to life. That's responsibility, that's part of the job description. That we can't just play the way we think the music needs to be, but we need to entertain other ideas and be able to inhabit them fully and in equal measures inspire those around us and be inspired. And I think in my own quartet life, there's really one central question I'm asking myself pretty much every day when I play, which is how can we play together and still remain free? And I think I find that when that happens, it's one of the most beautiful things that can happen in chamber music. And it takes a lot of sensitivity, a lot of openness, a lot of curiosity, and even a lot of tolerance for error along the way. If you're too focused on getting something right, whatever that means, or living up to a certain preordained standard, that nips in the bud any kind of creativity or real-time interaction. And it's always, I was talking to one of the groups here last night and just mentioning that, you know, for a lot of the most important repertoire we play, meaning all the Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven quartets, nobody published scores when these pieces were first issued. So you would only have your part. You wouldn't be able, it's a wonderful thing to study and know everything that's going to happen. And yet when you play, you can't come from a place of already knowing. You have to both hold the knowledge and discover the piece as you go and be ready to surprise your colleagues and be surprised in turn by your colleagues. And it's a very special mindset that we want to develop and encourage, I think, in chamber musicians.
Yeah, that's great. You know, it's this, what you started talking about, this issue of cueing. And that's so interesting when you have the experience of working with a younger group. And the thing is, young players are so good now that they can kind of play at a pretty high level without cueing. They can kind of just look at their parts and it sort of sounds okay. But it's a little incongruous that they're not communicating. So then you initiate this idea of, you know, what's the cue before and for young players that maybe are not experienced at that, they're a little uncomfortable. And then what I find often is that they'll cue. And they'll do everything possible to not generously communicate that the cue is for you and for you and for you. So they'll look at their music and they'll cue their stand. And it's like they're just going to look there, and the others, it's their job to figure what the heck just happened. so it's not about cueing in terms of, there is a physical gesture which is connect, but it's about the intent of sharing, the intent of communicating. And some younger players and older, some are really gifted at that, it comes incredibly, and some have to work really hard about just looking over. I mean, you know, it's so incredible when young players do discover that and do become comfortable in that world of cueing. And Mark, I think it was Mark, you mentioned the idea of conductors train in that idea of physical gesture. And then you go to orchestras. And you look at some orchestras who give all the responsibility of that to the conductor. They relinquish any role. And their job, as they see it, is to follow the conductor. It doesn't work so well. And then you go to Germany, you go watch the Berlin Philharmonic. And the entire group, 110 musicians, with great conductors, are moving like a huge string quartet. Like they're not static at all. And I would argue that they sound better than any orchestra I've heard in North America. So, I don't know. I think chamber music is not just about chamber music. I mean, we teach people to play chamber music, but if they don't end up being string quartets or playing trios, the skill of that communication, the skill of gesture, the skill of communicating is part of the larger musical experience, even in the orchestra. I don't know, that's my experience watching so many. I won't name the orchestras here that frustrate me, but yeah. Eckhart.
Yeah, I mean, so many beautiful things have been said, and I can totally agree. I would like to point out maybe two things that have already been said, but for me they are essential as what defines chamber music learning is, first of all, communication. And within the group, we have already talked about it, it's the responsibility of the one who sends the message that it is understood, not of the people that listen that the message is understood, right? You cannot say, well, I meant it that way, why didn't you understand it, right? No, you have to say it the way that it's understood. And if it's not understood, you have to try to say it in another way, right? Yeah. And we know it in disastrous way in politics and society, right? But the string quartet, I think, is like the concentration, the essence of society, in a communicative way within, as has been mentioned, with cueing, with moving, with anticipation, with sharing and making sure that the ideas are connecting in the group. And that's a beautiful thing also for young people to learn, that it's not about I'm just learning my piece and I'm banging it out and playing it as good as I can and maybe as different as possible, has never been played that way, or as sovereign as possible. But no, it's about communicating an emotion. That's the most important thing about music. And so within the quartet, there's this beautiful thing to learn about how communication works, also how to criticize someone with respect. It's so important. We're all teaching each other in quartets. Everyone has 3 coaches around him, and every mistake is mercilessly observed.
Right.
And every weakness is conveyed. And it's, of course, it's about emotions, about things that are important to you. So it's very, very vital, I think, for the survival of a quartet, that the communication within the group is very how do you say, caring, appreciative.
Yeah.
Yes, even if you criticize or all the more if you criticize. And so that's one thing that I think extends the horizon of students when they encounter chamber music in a very intense way. And the other thing also is the communication from us performers to an audience in the hall, which is much more complex in chamber music than in solo music. And the amateurs that I started out with have the immense privilege that they just play for themselves. They don't need an audience to hear the solo or second violin in a bad position, in a bad register, you know, because they're close enough to hear it. And we're doomed that it has to sound great over there, not here. It doesn't really matter how it sounds here. It can sound horrible here and fantastic there. Right? And so this is also something that I think is much harder in chamber music than in solo music, because you have to consider the whole thing when you work on your part. You have to know. That's why I think playing from a score is kind of important in the moment you rehearse, because it's so vital to understand what the others are doing while you play what is written in your part. And that might have enormous impact even on the fingering you choose.
Right.
Can I afford to play on the D string if 3 people are accompanying me in a full orchestration?
Right.
Probably I cannot. And then my whole idea, what I wanted to communicate, which I prepared with so much love, is useless because no one will understand it. And again, it's my responsibility to make sure ideas are understood, not the audience's knowledge or attentiveness or whatever it is. So this is something I think also can be learned. So not to make it too long, the second point I want to mention is responsibility. And I love the way you put it in saying that that the cueing is not one and the others follow, so everyone is cueing each other or taking part of this whole movement. That's a very beautiful way to put it. I think that our world is often divided in having too much power or rejecting responsibility. You say, it's not my business. They do politics. I don't. You know. So, but I think both is wrong and dangerous. And in chamber music, you learn that you can never, ever give up responsibility. So you can have the responsibility to shape, to lead, to be initiative about something, and also to give way and support. Maybe something you don't like, and that's even harder. You know, that's like being a good Democrat, to accept the opinion of the majority without how do you say, bombarding it. You can also be destructive, you know, to show your idea doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah, right. And against your instinct, you have to forward the whole idea of the expressive idea, the exclamation, the statement the quartet wants to make. Yeah. And it can only work if all 4 make this statement. If the statement is made differently within the group, it's watered and it's not clear. Nothing will communicate. And once again, then you have not fulfilled your duty of responsibility of communication. Yeah. So, and I think this is kind of interesting for young people also to learn in this concentrated way of chamber music. Of course, you can also learn it in other ways, but in chamber music, it's the essence.
Right. Now, it's interesting. Right now, you're working with particularly young people, right, and that are playing chamber music, where, I mean, they're discovering themselves as well, and their confidence level is maybe different than some older people. I'm curious what you see in that, and what your role is as a coach in working with, I would say, more vulnerable people.
And that's a great word to describe the whole experience. For any of us playing in chamber music, we are very vulnerable. You know, our emotions are out on display for the other three to experience with us. And I think the first thing to establish is that it is a very safe space. I know that sounds like a bit of a cliche, but I really think that is true. You know, these students are our future colleagues, right? And I always try to treat them with the respect that I would another colleague. And I think, you know, they may, you know, if they have a certain idea, they may change their mind over time and come up with a better phrasing idea or a better bowing or a better fingering. But going through that process and actually learning those things and giving them the space to maybe not do it absolutely the way I would, or, you know, absolutely maybe in my opinion the best way, I think is actually an important part of the learning process.
I think so.
And it's important for everybody in the group to learn how to, you know, there's always differing levels and experiences and ages in a group, and learning to be able to be supportive and helpful in a way where you're giving each person a voice is, I think, tremendously important. You know, our young people now are lonelier and more isolated than they've ever been, at least in recent history, right? So for us to be able to do something like this, like Eckhart was saying, like, yes, you can do and find things like this elsewhere, but this is a very kind of compressed sort of microcosm of that all of those learning skills that they're experiencing. So I'll tell you a quick story about one of my experiences coaching a very young group. It was their first chamber experience, 6 years old. And the first question I said, what is the most important thing about chamber music? And one little girl, confident as ever, she goes, look at your own part, don't stop looking at your part, and don't listen to anybody else. And I said, oh, okay, well, are there any other thoughts in the group? And then another little girl, very confident, raised her hand. She looked at the other little girl and she goes, you should always listen to everyone. And then I had a little dilemma, you know, again, first chamber, day one of her very first experience. And I said, you know, it is important to know what you're playing and to remember to keep counting, but it also may be even more helpful to keep listening to each other. So maybe that's it for all of us. Maybe that works for everyone.
I think Renelle has a magic approach with young people, and I think the proof of that is that, how many people live in Banff?
3,000?
Exactly. And we often have a group from Banff or nearby in our youth program, and they don't get special entrance because they're from Banff. It's because Renelle's doing great work with them. This idea of creating a safe space or creating a magical space or a space where certain ideals are celebrated. I think the Banff Center in its past had a long history of teaching chamber music at a very high level and with really beautiful ideals as guiding principles, which came, in my experience, from Tom and Isabel Rolston, who were very clear in what they thought was important. And I have a couple. I was just looking through some of the archive, and this, actually, Mark, you'll like this one. So this photo comes from the summer chamber music program of, I think it's, I'm going to say that is 1986. And the older gentleman in the back is the great violinist Laurent Fenemish, who I had a chance to study with. And he loved playing chamber music, so much so that he was one of the first concertmaster of the what's now the Israel Philharmonic. In fact, he was the first. And he so loved string quartet that he and 3 colleagues would meet in the early mornings before the rehearsals of the orchestra, so 7 o'clock, to rehearse string quartet playing, and then they would have the orchestra. It was what came from him, the takeaway I have was just the incredibly profound respect for the repertoire, and that it deserved a kind of intense exploration that was really, you're fully in. So this picture is Mr. Fenovich coaching one of my dearest friends, that's Stephen Satarsky, who is a violinist in Toronto, became concertmaster of Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony, and sitting beside him is the great American violinist Pamela Frank, who is one of the most celebrated chamber musicians, really, of our time. What you don't see is across from them is Jeff Nuttall and Leslie Robertson and Marina Hoover. This was before the St. Lawrence Quartet was formed, but things were happening in Banff in different groups. I just love that shot. And then the next shot, again, for those of us that know Banff Centre history, who's living in Lloyd Hall this week? Great. So you can channel the spirit of Zoltán Zekai, this wonderful older gentleman in the front, who was the first violinist of the Hungarian quartet, and premiered some of the Bartók quartets, and most importantly for him, premiered the second Bartók violin concerto, 1940, in the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. And he was such a legendary kind of sage, guru in chamber music, that the groups that came to Banff to study with him, to make pilgrimage almost, included the Takacs Quartet, before anybody knew who they were, members of the Alban Berg Quartet, before they were the Alban Berg Quartet, the Orford Quartet, and on and on and on and on and on and on. And we would go to his apartment in Lloyd Hall, and you'd spend, maybe you had scheduled an hour, but it was always 3 or 4 hours later that you left. And yeah, it was really beautiful. But the idea of Banff is not, it's not the only place. There are a number of places, most of them much smaller, most of them summer programs, where there's a kind of magic environment. And I think the success of those summer magical places is where our string quartets come from. And to name a few of them, Mark has taught at Taos, which is much higher than we are here, not known for chamber music other than this course in the summer when you take over a chalet, as I understand, right? Tell us a bit about Taos.
So yeah, the summer program at Taos happens actually not in the town of Taos, New Mexico, but in the Taos Ski Valley. So it's up much higher than that. We're up in the mountains. Hard to breathe, but great to make music. And we bring together 19 young musicians for 8 weeks. It's very isolated, so it's a real can be a kind of petri dish in a way. And they're put into groups, and it's an 8-week program. They have one piece for 2 weeks, and they rehearse together and have coaching every day, and then they perform, and then that cycle repeats 4 times. So it's incredibly intense. For a lot of people, it's a really pivotal experience. And one of the really wonderful things about that is not only getting to know each other and getting to know the music, but getting to know, as they are combined and recombined into groups, how to work together. And I do think that that's one of the most important things in chamber music teaching, coaching, is to address the issue of how we rehearse together, how we can bring out the best in each other, how we can inspire each other and be inspired by each other, how to know when to hold on tightly and when to let go, how to know, when to keep going with your idea and when to recede into the background and receive someone else's, how to be respectful and open to everyone around you, and how to let the people around you help you discover facets of yourself you didn't even know you had.
Yeah, amazing.
That's one of the most wonderful things about, I'm instrumentalists in the classical world tend to be a little bit different from singers. Singers tend to work with teachers and coaches their entire lives. We tend not to in any formal sense. And yet, hopefully we're all learning from every experience and everyone around us. And if you're in a chamber music group, really the people that are in the group with you are your teachers. And that's a really beautiful thing to be able to do for each other. And it takes a great amount of humility and openness and generosity. And those are virtues that, that as a chamber music coach, we work very hard to instill in the people who are working together. And it's not enough to only talk about the music and what the score is asking for and instrumental technique. There is absolutely a technique of working together. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we can address in very precise terms at certain moments. And I think it's really important to do so, to have that be an essential part of the curriculum, yeah, to discuss how we work together. And that's a very beautiful thing. I think it makes the musicians better musicians. It makes us all better people. And I think potentially it makes society a better place.
Beautiful. After the string quartet competition that I was in here in '92, where I met the incredible Ying Quartet, it was just interesting that we spent, in those days the competition was in April. And we're not going back to April, by the way. And then the Ying Quartet and the St. Lawrence had signed up for the same summer program. So we spent the entire summer, I was Tim Ying's roommate for the rest of the summer. We went to Tanglewood and we went to Aspen and we went to Norfolk and we studied intensely, and those are 3 incredible programs. There are some other programs. Marlborough is probably the most famous chamber music program in the U.S. and there are others. Kneisel Hall in Maine, Greenwood, and music. There are all sorts of wonderful programs. It turns out that Mark's predecessor in this role, the great Joel Krosnick, who sadly isn't with us anymore, who taught here, he had a long association teaching at this magical place, Kneisel Hall. And when he was in Banff, he met our filmmakers, Liam Romalis and others from Riddle, and asked them to come and make a little documentary on Kneisel Hall. So I have a short excerpt of that, which I think will put us into the environment of what some of these really incredible summer chamber music programs at the really highest level are. So let's take a quick look at this.
Go on. He's 2 octaves above you, so play. Yes, she's 3 octaves above you. So lean into the instrument. I mean, that's way up here. So just, it's not loud, play very expressively. Oh, and now, I like to have it in my left hand at the bottom. Do 337, all of you. Do 349. Have the bow a little further out so that it doesn't get to a little. You need somehow to do that diminuendo into the in tempo, which is the second theme.
So, the last 2 measures? Bum, 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 bum. Play those? It's hard for you to start the note immediately. Do you feel any of the notes?
It's a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Because this is all over the piece. You have those same definition in a more dramatic way in 54, right? You have the, you know, that da dee da ya. You're gonna start right there. Okay, I think there needs to be some correlation from what's yours, 51? Okay. Play that measure. Okay, now could you play 54? Right, I think it would be better since she has, and then you have a, then, and then, you're doing this, there's no correlation between the material.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Can you imagine 8 weeks of being in a program where you're rehearsing, you're going to a coach, you're going to concerts, you're eating meals together, you're celebrating each other, and you're growing? It's to see young people come out of those programs, the ones that we're describing, those extraordinary programs, they're changed people. And I think that that's where our groups are coming from. It's coming from obviously from good conservatories where they're studying during the year, and then they're having these transformative experiences as young people in these very specialized and rather beautiful places. We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to open it to you.